VikesNow, Dustin Baker, the January 6th edition, a couple days before Vikings at Bears. So, subsequently, we're going to talk about some storylines for the final regular season game of the year. Can you believe we're there already with the playoffs about less than a week and a half away, probably against the Giants? We might touch on that here in the next 15 minutes. But Minnesota is a 7.5-point favorite, a betting line that jumped from really late Sunday night, early Monday morning from 1, then to 3, now up to 5.5, now up to 7.5. It's been all over the place with the progression of knowing that Justin Fields isn't playing. But yeah, let's talk about the items that will be available for you to watch against the Bears at Soldier Field. The first one that I'm trying to get a drop on, I thought it was a settled business, is the stuff on starters. I had a feeling after the Vikings got their asses kicked in Green Bay that we'd have this debate pretty loudly about what do we do here? Do we get the mojo flowing the right way, or do we rest the starters and guarantee good health against probably the Giants next weekend? And it seemed that the head coach, Mr. O'Connell, came out Monday morning and said, I plan to play the starters, so, shut the hell up. What are we doing here? But as the week has gone on, I think it's changed a little bit. It seems like the dudes who would otherwise play if starters rested are getting more time in practice. And then I've sniffed around some of my sources, and they say nobody knows what's really going to happen. So it indeed may have been gamesmanship to begin with by O'Connell, or maybe they just thought about it more throughout the week and said, Brian O'Neill tore his his Achilles, so do we really want to risk that for other dudes on a famously shitty surface in Chicago as it is? But I thought this was settled business that the starters would play. I'm not 100% sure it's going to be exactly that way. Perhaps it's one of those things where they'd really do it like a preseason game where Cousins and the guys play a couple drives and then they put them on ice. But I don't know if it'll be an unfettered or regular starters game, especially because the Bears have nothing to play for and the Vikings are living on a prayer to get back the 2 seed. And that is the number 2 item that I wanted to mention is in support of playing starters. We have this pipe dream that, all right, yeah, they lost the 2 seed, damn it, but they can go get it back. Well, you need the 49ers, who have won every game forever here since McCaffrey arrived after that Chiefs loss. Hottest thing ever. They're not going to lose the Cardinals, who are quarterbacked by the Vikings' former QB3. That's what you need, a 2-touchdown underdog somehow in Santa Clara beats the 49ers, and then the Vikings win that they theoretically just tabulated against the Bears would have given them in the 2 seed. I just don't see that happening. If it was maybe a slightly different opponent than the Cardinals, I could fully endorse this path. But as soon as Vikings lost the Packers, I was like, all right, 3 seed it is. Let's move on, and just put that in my brain. But there's still chirping out there that says, all right, they can get the 2 seed. And then they'd probably play the Packers in round 1 of the postseason, so you can decide whether you enjoy that or not. 2 seed remains alive regardless, but I think you should warm up to the 3 seed. It's like a 95% possibility of happening, and then play the Giants, as Jerry Jones calls them. Next, number 3 is the quarterback for the Bears, Justin Fields. They finally shut down for the year, we have what we grown to know and love, a meaningless Bears-Vikings game to end the season. The only difference now is that it's in Chicago. Usually it's in Minneapolis. But indeed, Fields does not play, bad hip or something, shutting him down, getting ready for next year. We'll get to hear all spring and summer about how awesome he is and how he's going to be absolutely phenomenal. That's what Bears fans will tell you for the next, 9 months? It's all you'll hear from them. Get ready for it. But it's the inverse of the Fields excitement on the field this Sunday at noon. It's Nathan Peterman. And he came to prominence for throwing 5 interceptions in a single half. I think it was in 2017 against the Chargers, and then latched on to the Raiders, where he actually stayed for 3 years with Gruden and the gang as a QB2, QB3. Can't remember which number he had behind the acronym. But yeah, that guy is playing against the Vikings. So normally you'd be like, all right, well, there's an easy win. And that's what it should be. But every quarterback that's played against the Vikings this year has shown some semblance of production. I recall vividly the Patriots game where Mac Jones just looked phenomenal, and we talked on this show the day after that is that it felt like it would have been no different if Brady was playing. That's how good this defense made Jones look. So what does Peterman do to the Vikings? Is he just have his normal shitty outing and the Vikings steamroll for once? Or does he throw 270 yards and 3 touchdowns and maybe a pick or two? That's what he's capable of. I think he got into the league in 2017, bounced around and now landed with the Bears. It would have been Trevor Siemian, but he got hurt and he was the Vikings QB2 in 2018. But Peterman it is. That's the QB1 for the Bears, so that's a storyline to watch for. Next one might be the one you're most excited about, assuming that the starters play is the Justin Jefferson record watch. The enthusiasm for Justin Jefferson's record watch was severely tampered. The brakes were pumped because he had a nothing burger against the Packers. He was shut down by Jair Alexander and his buddies, and the turf, bad cleats. He only had 15 receiving yards, and that really pumped the brakes on the history that Justin Jefferson can achieve. But after all, this is Jefferson we're talking about, and with a Jeffersonian afternoon, he could still break history. He needs 194 yards to reach or pass Calvin Johnson from 2012, and then 229 receiving yards to hit the elusive 2,000-yard mark, which nobody has ever hit in a wide receiver's regular season. Meanwhile, he's also pretty much a lock to win Offensive Player of the Year award. I don't think folks talk about that enough because the Dolphins season has gone into the commode. They were 8-3, now they're 8-8. The votes for Tyreek Hill as a theoretical Offensive Player of the Year recipient have dwindled, and he's now second fiddle to Jefferson. Jefferson odds are minus 800, and Tyreek is plus 1,400. So, there's an orbit where Tyreek Hill has 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then the voters might be like, all right, we're going to give it to him. He had a better season. But because the Dolphins began losing in the last month and a half or so, Jefferson's probably got a handle on Offensive Player of the Year, which is kind of neat. So watch Jefferson, see what he does. Is it a big response game? Does he not even play because we were tricked into believing starters would play? We shall see. Probably the most important one for the play the starters crowd is the coagulation of this offensive line. Last week it didn't look very good. It looked mistake prone. Chris Reed didn't look like he knew what he was doing. Ordinarily he's a very good football player, but when you throw him in at center, not his organic position, on the road against a natural rival in the cold, it didn't go well. When he pass blocked, that part went well, but the pre-snap tomfoolery didn't go well. But I think with a week's worth of practice, Chris Reed can be the guy until Bradbury comes back, if at all, in the postseason. But Reed's a good football player. You'll hear me say that over and over. And then Oli Udoh at right tackle instead of Brian O'Neill. That's just going to be the way it is now, and probably into the spring and summer, unless Udoh goes elsewhere, because O'Neill partially tore that Achilles and isn't expected back for a long time, hopefully by the start of 2023. But this offensive line, we have it in our bones to be paranoid about what the solution will be when bad stuff happens. And I'm holding out hope that because it's a new coaching staff and it's not the Zimmer rendition that always came up with these weird patchwork on-the-fly tricks, I think the offensive line can come to a serviceable standard, especially with the Giants probably on the way. After that, 49ers, after that, the Eagles. It doesn't get any easier for pass rushers who the Vikings could potentially face in the postseason. And let's face it, the Bears defense sucks. They traded away their 2 best players back in, October, Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn. So you should get a nice little gimme to figure out, get your poop in a group on the offensive line with Udoh and Reed, because the Bears just aren't too ferocious. Of course, it could be one of those vintage NFC North games at Soldier Field where they play down to the level of each other and then the game ends like 17-13 the score. But regardless, especially if the Vikings play starters, they have time to get this fivesome ready to go for the Giants, because Wink Martindale Jr. is going to blitz the shit out of the Vikings like he did 2.5 weeks ago. And he'll probably do it even more now that they're susceptible to a pass rush without Brian O'Neill. And finally, I'm going to go through a list of all these former players. This list is huge. But first, I want to say, do the Vikings end the season on a high note? Is that important? If they somehow start all of their starters, the Vikings, and then they lose to the Bears, this really would feel like the 2004 season where it started off great and then all of our wind is out of our sails because of the way that they finished. I don't think that'll happen, but I think that is the mentality behind playing some or all starters is, how are you going to go into playoffs? You just got your ass beat by the Packers. I think that's the idea. You go in there, you get some momentum, and then maybe if they get up 21-7, you toss Nick Mullins and Ty Chandler and Jalen Naylor in and see what they got. But I don't really care if they finish on a high note because I just don't think it means anything. I think the offensive line chemistry is important, but finishing on a high note, I don't think that personally matters, but evidently you do and the coaching staff does. But we'll have to see. Does it happen? And then finally, all of the former players, players to that former team that are involved in this game is pretty wild. So on the Vikings end, it's Duke Shelley and Kairos Tonga, two guys that were cut right at the end of August by the Bears, who've played fabulously for the Vikings and have been unsung contributors that kind of came out of nowhere. Nobody knew who they were other than, me and folks who watch this show. But, John at the grocery store doesn't know who Duke Shelley is. Well, he might know now. He's a cast-off from the Bears. So Tonga and Shelley will get a shot at their old team. And then listen to this list that the Vikings, former Vikings on the Bears active roster. Kari Blasingame, the fullback. DeMarcus Gates, a linebacker, brief stint with the Vikings. Harrison Hand, cornerback, spent 2 years with Minnesota. Jalen Holmes, the 2020 pass rusher when Danielle Hunter got hurt. Holmes is a primary starter. Elijah Lee was drafted by the Vikings in 2017. Didn't last long. Riley Reif, who you know and love, with the team several seasons. I think he started 56 games with the Vikings. And then Armin Watts, the surprise summer cut, I think that we even did a whole show about. He was supposed to be a starting defensive lineman for the Vikings. Ended up with the Bears. Has been meh. Not deadly, but not horrible. Blasingame, Gates, Harrison Hand, Holmes, Elijah Lee, Reif, and Watts. That's a lot of former Vikings on a single team, and it's not like the Vikings and Bears front offices have ties. Kwesi isn't an understudy of Pohl or anything like that. It's just weird coincidence that so many of these Vikings have gone to play on the active roster for the Bears. So when you turn on your television and you see a bunch of these dudes, you're gonna kind of do the DiCaprio meme where you're pointing at him saying, "I remember him." And then Trevor Siemian, he's on IR. And then the Bears also have Dakota Dozier, who got hurt, I think, before the season even started. He's on injured reserve. So all in all, that's like 9 guys that you will know and not love, but remember because of Vikings draft ties or just pit stops with the team. Ultimately, I do expect Minnesota to win this game, whether it's Nick Mullins and company or Cousins, 24-12. Anytime you watch one of these games at Soldier Field, exact same feeling. Feels ugly. Recently, the Vikings have found a way to win. They've won their last 2 games at Soldier Field. I think both of them were Monday nighters. But yeah, 24-12, that's what I got, and I'll be there. This was my first time at Soldier Field. So in terms of the outlook for this show, I should be back Tuesday to chat about the aftermath of this. And if it's kind of how we expect, where the Vikings win, but it's nothing too special, then we'll probably already pivot into playoff week and preview the Giants, Seahawks, Lions, or Packers, but it'll probably be the Giants. We'll talk to you next week, and Skol, baby.